Merry Christmas, Exiles. Hope you guys had a fantastic holiday season. Milkman Al here. My gift to all of you is this low-life, spell-slinging Blade Blast Bladefall Inquisitor. This build has been a ton of fun to play. It's super easy, quality of life is very high, clear speed is fantastic, single target is definitely good enough to get you through anything that the game throws at you. And all of that is done on a budget of well under 7 exalts. By far the most expensive thing in this build is Awakened Spell Cascade. Given that, this build is an awesome choice for casual players, for league starts, even for the upcoming Delirium Everywhere event. So like I said, I've had a ton of fun playing this build, and we'll get into it in just a second. But before we do, if you like this, please like and subscribe to this YouTube video, and follow me live on twitch.tv/milkmanal1 on Wednesdays and Sundays from 8 to 10 p.m. Central. I hope to see you all there. So first off, we have skills. Obviously, Blade Blast is our main killer, so we have that linked in a 6 link with Spellslinger. These damage supports are not optimal. You can get Awakened added fire damage. Also, you can use Awakened Elemental Focus, and those will increase your damage substantially. You may notice a couple of things about this, particularly Spellslinger is level 21, and that's really important because you want some extra cooldown. Extra levels of Spellslinger give you more cooldown recovery rate. And we'll talk about why that's important here in just a little bit. Also over here, you see my damage is listed at 3.3 million. That is not accurate. That's for 50 blades. We'll kind of discuss a damage calculation here also in just a minute. Next, we've got Bladefall linked to Spellslinger, so you can cast your blades and blow them up at the same time. You can see that we've got Awakened Spell Cascade and Concentrated Effect, and this is actually anomalous Concentrated Effect because it gives you additional less area of effect. Now, it's very important that you shrink the area of effect on your Bladefall as much as possible, because you want the blades that it drops to be clustered as closely as they can be together to maximize your single target damage. Your area clear is fine, so there's no reason to not do this. Now, if you don't have Awakened Spell Cascade, regular Spell Cascade is fine, but that is about a 40% damage penalty. So it's really important that you get Awakened Spell Cascade as quickly as possible. In this league, it was about 3 exalts. I think I bought mine for 3.5, which is by far the cheapest I've ever seen Awakened Spell Cascade. But in any event, this build is still very functional without that, but it's still a big hit to your functional damage. Next, we have the movement skill, Flame Dash, faster casting, nothing real fancy there. Also have Vitality, which is a huge buff to durability and survivability for this build, because you can take advantage of the Inquisitor's ascendancy to make the life regeneration also apply to energy shield, and we'll get into that more in just a minute as well. We got lots of good stuff coming. We've got Steel Skin here because this build is very weak on the physical mitigation side of things, doesn't have any endurance charges, and also doesn't have very much armor as it stands. So it's really important to mitigate physical damage as much as possible. Zealotry, just a huge damage buff. Assassin's Mark, also a big damage buff. I am currently self-casting this because I frankly just don't have the links to automate it. That's not a huge problem because usually I only use this against single targets, and casting it once every 10 seconds is not a big deal. Frenzy, this is our attack that we use to proc Spellslinger. So you're constantly maintaining frenzy charges with that, and you see that I have power charge on critical there. That's how I maintain power charges as well, which is also a huge damage boost. I chose to use GMP on here because I wanted the frenzy projectiles to hit as much as possible and proc the power charge on critical. You could potentially go without that and switch things up to use Power Siphon and then also have a Blood Rage gem active. As for the rest of the auras, we've got Petrified Blood, because this is in fact a low life build, and converting damage to damage over time to you is extremely powerful given the high level of life regen that you have. So here you can see I've got about 1,300 life and energy shield regeneration per second. Anytime you can convert a big hit into damage over time, that's a massive boost to survivability. Herald of Ash is a giant damage boost. As you will be able to see here, I go from 3.4 million damage to 2.1 million damage when I take that off. So this is a really important skill to have, and it also helps you with your clear because everything's blowing up. Clarity, because of the changes to Spellslinger, which made it both reserve more mana and cost mana to use the skills that are linked to Spellslinger, mana is in short supply for this build. I've done a bunch of things to mitigate that, and we'll talk about that just in a second in the gear section. I am currently quite reliant on an Enduring Mana Flask. I can get by without it, but Clarity definitely makes life much easier. It just makes gameplay so much smoother and feel way better. Okay, so I mentioned that DPS is not exactly what it looks like in this display. First off, you will probably never have 50 blades out. More realistically, you will have 12.5 blades out. Bladefall leaves a lingering blade in the ground for every volley, and it has 5 volleys. But there are 50% fewer lingering blades in the ground if you don't cast this spell yourself, and we are not doing that. We're triggering it. This gets complicated in a hurry. If you want to know how much damage you're doing exactly, you have to look over here for your DPS per blade. So for me, that's 67,000 roughly, and about 70,000 after ignite damage is concerned. You multiply this number by how many blades you drop per cast, which in our case is 15. It's 12.5 times 1.2, because you have a 20% chance of dropping an extra one each time you drop a blade. So you multiply this by 15, and then you multiply it by your attack speed. In my case, this total works out very close to the 50 blade number, so I just use that as a quick and dirty estimate, because I can't be bothered to calculate my damage exactly, because it really just doesn't matter that much. But if you're interested, that's how you do it. So we need to talk about how cooldown interacts with attack speed, because that's actually a huge portion of this build. It's very important to know how frequently you can actually cast your spells with Spellslinger. For that, we have this handy dandy Reddit thread, which I will link in the description of this video. So as you can see here, just a basic level 21 Spellslinger gem, which I mentioned is very important, gives you 40% cooldown rate. You need 2.33 attacks per second to match that cooldown rate. So you want your attacks per second to be this number or lower, because if they are higher than this number, that is, your attack speed is more than 2.33 attacks per second, then you're going to have a lot of attacks that do not trigger your Spellslinger skills, namely Blade Blast and Bladefall. So that's basically a lot of wasted time and a huge damage decrease. Obvious breakpoints to go for here are 40%, which is just the Spellslinger gem and nothing else, level 21 Spellslinger. The next one is 66%, which you can get easily either from the 30% enchant on a helmet or using a belt and boots with cooldown recovery. The one that I chose to go to was this one, 103%. That choice will constrain your gear a fair bit because the cooldown mods on belts and boots are relatively rare, and to get other good mods along with them is not that common. So you might find yourself spending a fair bit of currency on those two things if you want to really achieve in-game gear. So the reason I chose to go that route over the 66% breakpoint, which is the lowest one that I would actually recommend, this is about a 22% more damage. I find that to be worth it, but if you don't and you want less constraint in your gear, by all means, downgrade here. So if you need to, you come in here to Path of Building and fiddle around with the new gear you're planning on buying or crafting to make sure that you don't exceed those breakpoints with your new attack speed. That's very important. So let's talk gear. I mentioned in the intro that the gear is very, very cheap. And part of the reason for that is this is an extremely non-meta build. Spellslinger fell out of favor hardcore with the mana changes. And when Blade Blast got its radius nerfed, that also made it fall out of favor. So you've got two big strikes going against this build in popular opinion, which makes the gear really undesirable and really cheap, and that's fantastic for us. So main goals of gear in this build are cooldown recovery for Spellslinger. They are getting as much life regeneration as possible and getting a whole shitload of dexterity because this build is extremely starved for dex, unfortunately. Now, the really nice thing about this build is that Moon Sorrow is actually one of the best things that you can use for it. Certainly you can come up with a crazy plus skill gems, lots of extra fire damage to spells wand and stuff, but that is unreal expensive. I bought this Crangled wand for 5 chaos. You probably can't even get anybody to trade you a normal Moon Sorrow wand because they're so common. So actually doing that trade might be kind of difficult, but this is more or less best in slot, realistically. And again, 5C. So I chose to use a Prism Guardian for my life reservation to get me to low life status all the time. Lori's Lantern, dirt cheap. I got a perfect rolled one because why not? It's still like 2 chaos. One of the weird niche things that you'll need is a good helmet with the Spellslinger cooldown recovery rate reduced. I found this one for about 50k. I think this was 50 chaos. There are lots of similar things available because again, this is not a desirable enchant because nobody likes Spellslinger. Perhaps the most expensive and niche piece of gear that I have though is my amulet. I ran into issues with mana reservation and trying to squeeze all the auras in, so I had to get something with heavy zealotry mana reservation efficiency reduction. So as you can see, this amulet basically has everything that this build wants. It's got extra armor, it has lots of life, it has life regen, a little bit of resistance, and the extremely important minus mana cost to skills, which for this build, since you're attacking, you are casting Bladefall and Blade Blast all at the same time, this is effectively tripled. So more or less, it's like minus 21 to your mana cost per attack. That's huge. So since the minus mana cost is such a big deal, I have that on this ring too. I would probably have it on a third ring if I could, but Lori's Lantern is way too important to leave out, and it helps so much with survivability that that's just not worth it. So I was lucky enough to pick this ring up, which fits this build extremely well, but was not expensive. The plus mana for each enemy hit by your spells is a gigantic help with sustain, because you're hitting things all the time. Like I said, there's 15 blades that each explode with each cast. Also, Bladefall itself hits a whole bunch of stuff. So you're gaining back a ton of mana. As I mentioned, I am moderately dependent on an Enduring Mana Flask, but because of this ring and the amulet, I don't 100% need it. It just makes everything feel a lot more smooth. So for gloves, I went for dexterity mainly with the just life resist, the attack speed that I needed to get close to the Spellslinger breakpoint. And I simply searched for gloves that had an open prefix and were not crafted so I could put the physical to fire conversion on it, because it's just way easier to do that yourself than search for gloves that have all the mods you want and the conversion on it. The belt is really far from optimal, but at least it has armor and life on it, and the 34% damage during flask effect is huge because you basically always have that on. The boots, again, are nothing fancy, just life, movement speed, and a little crafted resistance on it, plus the cooldown recovery. Now, my personal favorite piece of gear is the armor. I bought this for 30 chaos, which I think was actually extremely cheap, but it's still not going to cost you a whole lot of money because, again, this isn't a popular build. So I chose to get as much armor and energy shield as I could, life, tons of life regen, got lucky with the resistances, and then I crafted Gravicius's craft, which is gain 9% of maximum life as extra energy shield. This is sort of hard to get on your own, but you can go and trade for level 81 armors that have the Gravicius craft. You can just search that in the trade API. And so yeah, all this gear, well under 3x. Not a problem. It's very cheap, very good for league start. Why don't we talk about the skill tree, shall we? You have some pretty important nodes that you need to hit. So big goals for you are this wheel here, this cluster here, and this cluster here. All of these have both life and energy shield on them. And one of the biggest notables is melding here with the extra life and max life as extra energy shield. To take advantage of the fact that this build has both a ton of life and energy shield, I've used a Doriani Glorious Vanity Jewel, so I can get Corrupted Soul, and half of damage bypasses energy shield. That sounds bad, but it's actually a really good thing because it lets you use your life and energy shield recovery at the same time. So the downside of this jewel is actually an upside, plus it gives you 15% of your life as maximum extra energy shield. So there's really not a huge downside to using this outside of the fact that you just have to use some skill points for it. When building this character, I actually went down this way to get the fire conversion and the life regen nodes. I don't recommend doing that, frankly. I think I would go up here first to get the mana reservation efficiency, so you can bring Spellslinger online a lot more quickly, because I sort of struggled with mana early on and couldn't use Spellslinger until I believe my 40s when I was able to reroute my skills and get up here. So I think I would go here first and then get all the goodies down here. And fire conversion doesn't really matter all that much until you get Inevitable Judgment, which ignores enemies' resistances when you crit. Since we're talking about ascendancies, I recommend coming up here to Pious Path first, so you can really get the crux of the build's survivability going as soon as possible. You can compensate for not having this extra damage by just going into some crit nodes and speccing into that early on. So I did want to highlight a few really important parts of this tree other than just getting life and energy shield. So first off, this node is straight up 20% more damage. You have to get this mastery. The extra lingering blade makes a really, really big difference. And it's not really out of the way anyway, because you want Iron Will, you probably want Constitution, and some extra mana regen and life regen. There's no reason to not go there. Wand mastery, the unnerve for 40 seconds when hit with wands, is another 10% damage, because unless you stretch, you're not going to have another way to unnerve enemies. Fortunately, the nodes in this cluster provide generic damage with a wand, so it works for both attacks and spells, so you're not wasting your time getting this cluster. Also, you get some extra attack speed with wands, which is really important for hitting your cooldown breakpoints with Spellslinger. The last thing that you have to make sure you don't miss is Pain Attunement. And since you're always on low life, this is just 30% more spell damage all the time. So as mentioned in the intro, this character's only level 80. So there's lots of work to be done. Things that I would suggest, since it's already pretty darn durable in tier 16 maps, I would go mostly for damage. There isn't a lot of damage scaling on the tree other than those more damage nodes that we just talked about. So if you start speccing into things like crit and just some general damage here, you're going to skyrocket your damage real fast. So just for shits and giggles, I spec'd into a few damage nodes here, but I increased damage from 70,000 to almost 105,000, so literally 50% more damage. All right, let's fire this bad boy up, shall we? Got a Warlord Influence tier 16 map with some average map mods on it, not too bad, so you'll get to see how this goes. So generally speaking, I have enough mana to consistently cast everything that I want to when I'm hitting things, but usually I trigger my mana flask just to be safe, just for comfort. So as you can tell, the clear is pretty good, not really a problem. Single target like right here is okay. Usually you need to have Assassin's Mark up on stuff to make it go down quickly, but these magic packs, all of that stuff, even rares are not really a problem. And remember, this is a tier 16 map, and I am level 81. This is a nice straight map for showing off this build. So here we'll get an example of the single target damage, which you'll see is passable but not fantastic right at the moment. But do keep in mind that you can essentially double your single target by optimizing the gems and gaining about 10 levels, which I think is realistic for most people. I typically end my builds in the early 90s. So again, here's another opportunity to see the single target. And the tankiness. I'll just sit here and face tank him if I can. That's a little dicey. Maybe I'll stop doing that. But you can see my HP and energy shield regenerating pretty readily. So not the fastest boss kill, but, you know, for sure, pretty smooth for a level 81 character in a red map. I'm very happy with it. It feels smooth to play. It's really enjoyable. No complaints. So to summarize this build, it's really strong on a budget, though it is fairly dependent on getting an Awakened spell cascade to increase your damage. It's extremely durable, definitely in-game viable in all phases. Single target damage is okay, I would say. Clear is excellent. It's very easy to play and a lot of fun. I highly recommend it. So again, if you guys like this, please like and subscribe the video. I'll see you live on either Twitch or YouTube, 8 to 10 p.m. Central, Wednesdays and Sundays. Merry Christmas, everybody. Take it easy.